There is a specific kind of silence that falls over a restaurant when something real is happening. Not the comfortable quiet of a slow afternoon, not the hushed murmur of people trying not to disturb the couple beside them. A different kind of silence altogether, the kind where forks stop halfway to mouths and conversations trail off mid-sentence and everyone in the room feels, without being able to name it, that something is unfolding in front of them that does not belong in the middle of a lunch service. That silence fell over Caldwell's Bistro in downtown Knoxville, Tennessee, at 12:47 on a Wednesday afternoon in October, when a restaurant manager named Howard appeared from the back hallway with a look on his face that every person who has ever worked in a service job recognizes immediately and instinctively, the way animals recognize weather before it arrives. And at table 7, a woman who had been sitting alone with a glass of sparkling water and a plate she had barely touched looked up from the window she had been staring through and went very still. She watched a 24-year-old waiter named Marcus Webb being pulled aside. She watched the conversation happen in low, controlled tones in the narrow corridor between the kitchen and the dining room. She watched Marcus disappear into the back of the restaurant and emerge 7 minutes later in street clothes, carrying a small backpack, walking with the particular kind of steadiness that people produce only when they are working extremely hard not to fall apart in public. And then she watched something that made her set down her glass and not pick it up again. She watched a young woman, visibly unwell, moving slowly, her face carrying the specific exhaustion of someone whose body has been fighting something for a long time, come out of the back of the restaurant and take Marcus's arm. And the two of them walked out of the building together into the October afternoon and disappeared from her view. And that woman at table 7 sat completely still for 11 seconds. She counted them later, because she was the kind of person who noticed things precisely. And at the end of those 11 seconds, she made a decision that would unravel and then reconstruct two lives in ways that none of them, not Marcus, not Chloe, not Catherine Ellison herself, could have mapped from where they were standing in that moment. This is that story. And we are going to tell it to you completely, from the beginning, the way it deserves to be told. Before we go any further, let us know in the comments right now where you are watching from. We would genuinely love to hear from you. And if you are new here, please click on the subscribe button right now so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. We put out stories like this one regularly, and you do not want to miss what is coming next. Marcus Webb was born in Knoxville, Tennessee, on a Tuesday in March, the first child of Raymond and Diane Webb, in a house on a street where people kept their front stoops swept and their yards tidy not because they had a lot but because they took pride in what they had. That distinction matters. There is a version of poverty in America that gets depicted on television as chaotic and visually obvious, and then there is the version that most people actually live, the version where everything looks fine from the outside and the inside is a precise, exhausting calculation that never fully resolves. The Webb household was the second kind. Raymond Webb had spent the better part of 2 decades working as a construction foreman, the kind of man who knew how to read a site plan and manage a crew of 12 and get a job done 3 days ahead of schedule without asking anyone for a thank you. He was good at his work in the way that people are good at something when it is genuinely part of who they are, not just what they do. He coached Marcus's Little League team for 4 years even during the seasons when Raymond's own shoulder was giving him trouble and he had to grip the bat with both hands just to demonstrate the swing. He made breakfast on Sundays without being asked. He told the same 3 jokes so reliably that Marcus and his younger sister Chloe had memorized the punchlines before they were in middle school and still laughed every single time because it was their father's laugh at the end of them that was really the point. Raymond Webb was a man who held things together quietly, which is the specific kind of man that a family is only fully grateful for in retrospect, after the holding together is no longer possible. In 2011, on a Tuesday afternoon in August, Raymond was on a job site in East Knoxville when a section of scaffolding shifted in a way that the safety checklist had not accounted for, and Raymond moved to stabilize it, and in doing so torqued his lower back in a way that herniated 2 discs simultaneously. He did not go to the hospital immediately. He finished the day. He drove himself home, took 4 ibuprofen with a glass of water at the kitchen sink, and told Diane when she asked that he'd pulled something and it would be fine in a few days. It was not fine in a few days. It was not fine at all, and by the time the full picture of the injury became clear through imaging and specialist consultations, the damage was the kind that does not get fully repaired. Surgery helped to a degree. Physical therapy helped to a degree. But the work that Raymond had done for 20 years, the physical, demanding, on-your-feet-all-day work that had given his life its structure and rhythm and purpose, that work was over. He was 43 years old, and the career that had defined him was done. He transitioned eventually to disability income, which covered the basics and nothing beyond them, and he took up woodworking in the garage because he needed something to do with his hands and his time, and because making things was the only language of usefulness he had ever fully trusted. He was not a bitter man. But he was quieter after 2011. The house was quieter after 2011. Marcus noticed, and filed it away in the part of himself that would later understand it. Diane Webb was a licensed practical nurse on the overnight shift at a regional medical center, which meant she slept in the mornings and the house operated around her schedule with the precision of a system that everyone had silently agreed to maintain. No television before noon. Shoes off at the door always. Voices low in the hallway between 7 and 11 in the morning. She was organized in the way that nurses tend to be organized, not as a personality trait but as a survival mechanism developed over years of working in environments where disorganization has consequences. She kept a budget spreadsheet printed out and attached to the refrigerator with a magnet in the shape of the state of Tennessee, and she updated it every 2 weeks after payday with a green pen for income and a red pen for expenses. Marcus had understood that spreadsheet by the time he was 11. He understood which column was supposed to be bigger and what happened in the months it wasn't. He did not need anyone to explain financial pressure to him. It was the wallpaper of his childhood, always present, never explicitly discussed, shaping everything around it. Chloe arrived 4 years after Marcus, in a December, and she was from the beginning the kind of person who makes other people's lives feel slightly more interesting than they were before she appeared in them. She laughed at things nobody else caught. She had opinions about everything and the particular gift of expressing them in ways that made you feel like she had said something you had always thought but never quite articulated. She read obsessively, not the books assigned in school but the ones she found on her own in the back sections of the public library, natural history, and field guides and books about the behavior of birds specifically, which she had been fascinated by since she was 7 years old and their father had pointed out a red-tailed hawk sitting on a fence post at the edge of a park and said, very quietly, "Look at that." She could name every common Tennessee bird by its call before she was in high school. She kept a pressed flower notebook, a soft-covered journal she had started in middle school, in which she pressed wildflowers and small leaves and occasionally a feather she found on the ground, labeling each one in her careful handwriting with the date and location she had found it. That notebook would become important later in this story. Hold on to it. By the time Chloe was 19 and enrolled as a nursing student at the community college, she wanted to be what their mother was, and she had the temperament and the intellect for it. Marcus had already been working at Caldwell's Bistro in downtown Knoxville for about a year. Caldwell's was a mid-range American bistro with cloth napkins and a seasonal menu, the kind of restaurant that occupied the careful middle ground between fine dining and neighborhood bar, attracting a clientele of local attorneys, hospital administrators, small business owners, and the occasional out-of-town executive in town for a meeting or a conference. It was the kind of place where the food was genuinely good and the service was expected to be attentive without being intrusive, and where a server who could read the room well and remember faces was genuinely valued. Marcus was exactly that kind of server. He had a quality of presence at work that his manager Howard had noted in his first performance review and again in his second, the ability to be exactly as visible as the situation required, no more and no less. He remembered regulars' orders without being told twice. He noticed when a table had been waiting a few minutes too long before anyone acknowledged them and corrected it without making a production of it. He was reliable in the way that made managers stop worrying about whoever he was, which in restaurant work is the highest possible compliment. Howard had flagged him 6 months before this story begins as a candidate for shift lead, which would have meant a modest but meaningful increase in his hourly rate plus a small percentage of the tip pool from tables he managed. Marcus had needed that promotion. He was counting on it. And then Chloe got sick. And the entire architecture of the life Marcus had been carefully constructing began to shift in ways he could not immediately stop. The diagnosis came on a Thursday afternoon in late spring, delivered by a nephrologist at a regional medical center 40 minutes from Knoxville, a doctor named Dr. Anand Mehta, who had a reputation for being extremely direct and who was direct now, sitting across from Chloe and Marcus in a consultation room that smelled faintly of disinfectant and recycled air. Lupus nephritis. A complication of systemic lupus erythematosus in which the immune system, instead of protecting the body, turns against the kidneys, attacking the structures responsible for filtering blood and removing waste. Lupus nephritis is among the most severe organ manifestations of lupus, affecting between 31 and 48% of patients, usually within 5 years of diagnosis. Real short in Chloe's case it had moved faster than that average, which Dr. Mehta explained with careful precision, watching them both as he spoke the way doctors do when they are trying to determine how much information a patient and their family can process in a single sitting. He explained the treatment plan. Immunosuppressants to slow the immune response. Blood pressure medications to protect the kidneys from the additional strain of the disease. Corticosteroids in the short term to manage acute inflammation. Regular nephrology appointments every 6 to 8 weeks, with lab work before each one. A strict management protocol that Chloe would need to maintain consistently, without gaps, because with lupus nephritis the gaps were where the damage accelerated. He said the word consistent more than any other word in that consultation. Marcus counted. He counted because it gave him something to do with the part of his brain that was trying to calculate, even in that room, what consistent treatment was going to cost. The answer to that question, when he sat down with the numbers later that evening at the kitchen table while Chloe slept in the next room, was not a manageable one. Annual direct medical costs for lupus nephritis average around $33,000 and can exceed $50,000 when medications, infusions, lab work, and specialist visits are added together. Goodreads Chloe had insurance through her part-time job at a clothing store, a plan that covered a portion of her expenses but left a monthly out-of-pocket cost that, when Marcus finished the calculation, sat at just under $400 before transportation costs for the specialist appointments 40 minutes away. Chloe had already reduced her hours at the store because the fatigue that came with the disease and its treatment was not the ordinary tiredness of a busy schedule. It was a different category of exhaustion altogether, the kind that arrives in the body like weather, without warning, and requires not rest but surrender. Some mornings she could not stand long enough to shower without sitting down on the floor of the tub. The clothing store had been understanding to a point. And then the point arrived, as it does in hourly employment, and her hours were cut, and then cut again, and then she stopped being scheduled at all, which meant the partial insurance coverage she had through them was also gone. She went on to the state marketplace plan. The premium was lower. The coverage was thinner. The monthly out-of-pocket number went up. Marcus looked at the spreadsheet he had made, not printed on the refrigerator like his mother's, but on his phone, in a notes app, updated every 2 weeks, and the numbers told him exactly what they told him every time he ran them. There was not enough room. He was covering his share of the apartment rent he and Chloe split, his own basic living expenses, and now an increasing share of Chloe's medical costs on a waiter's salary supplemented by tips that varied week to week depending on the season and the volume of the restaurant and factors entirely outside his control. He had already stopped buying anything that was not strictly necessary. He ate staff meal at the restaurant whenever it was available. He took the bus instead of driving because parking downtown cost money he did not have. He had sold a guitar he had owned since he was 17, a decent acoustic he had saved for over 8 months as a teenager and played almost every day for 7 years, to a pawn shop for $215 because $215 was $215 and the guitar was a luxury and Chloe's medications were not. He did not tell anyone he had done this. He put the money in the account and updated the spreadsheet and moved on. He asked Howard for a schedule adjustment in September. Evening shifts only, 3 or 4 per week, so that he could be home with Chloe during the days when her fatigue was most severe and when, increasingly, she was not safe to be alone. Howard listened and then explained, not unkindly, that the schedule did not accommodate it, Caldwell's lunch service was their highest revenue period and Marcus was one of their strongest lunch servers, and restructuring around his availability was not something Howard could justify to the owner. Marcus asked about family medical leave. Howard said it applied to situations involving a spouse or child or parent, not a sibling, technically accurate under federal law, which does not require employers to provide FMLA leave for a sibling's illness, a detail that Marcus sat with for a long time after the conversation ended. He asked about unpaid leave. Howard said 2 weeks maximum, and that was not going to cover a chronic illness situation without a clear end date. Marcus thanked him and went back to the floor and refilled water glasses and asked people how everything was tasting, and on the inside he was running the same math he had been running for weeks and it was still coming out wrong. He looked into home health aides through Knox County's Social Services Department. The waiting list for subsidized home care was estimated at 4 to 6 months, which was the kind of timeline that made sense as a bureaucratic abstraction and made no sense at all as a real answer to a real problem that was happening right now, this week, today. Private aides cost between $20 and $30 an hour. He called 3 agencies and got 3 quotes, which on his income was not a real option. He called a nonprofit that the hospital social worker had mentioned that assisted families navigating chronic illness situations. They sent him a PDF with links. He followed the links. Several of them led to programs with waiting lists. Several others had income eligibility thresholds that he was just above because his tips, in the calculation used by the program, pushed his annual income slightly past the cutoff. He was too poor to afford care and too employed to qualify for the programs designed for people too poor to afford care. He sat with that particular absurdity for a while and then he did what he always did, which was put it away and keep going, because stopping had never been an option he could actually afford. And then came a morning in early October that changed the calculus entirely. Marcus was at work, midway through a lunch shift, standing at the service station writing a table's order on his pad, when his phone buzzed in his apron pocket with a text from Chloe. He was not supposed to check his phone during service. He checked it. She had written 3 words, "I'm okay now." Which, when your sick younger sister texts you those 3 words in the middle of the day when she is home alone, does not mean she is okay. It means something happened and it is now over and she is managing it and she does not want you to panic. He texted back immediately, "What happened?" and she took 4 minutes to respond, which was long enough for Marcus to have already decided what he was going to do if she didn't respond. She wrote, "Blood pressure dropped, got dizzy, grabbed the counter, didn't fall, I'm fine, please don't leave work." He read that on a Tuesday at 12:52 in the afternoon at the service station of Caldwell's Bistro, and he finished his shift with his face arranged in the correct professional expression, and when he got home that evening he sat down on the edge of Chloe's bed and they had a conversation that was very quiet and very honest about the reality of the situation, which was this: she could not be left alone during the day anymore. Not reliably. Not safely. And he was not going to do it. He spent 3 days thinking through the options that remained. He laid them out in the Notes app the same way he laid out the budget, systematically, without sentimentality, because sentimentality was a luxury that the spreadsheet did not have room for. The options that remained, after exhausting every official channel, numbered exactly 1. It was not a good option. He knew that. He proceeded with it anyway because the alternative was leaving his sister alone in an apartment where she had already nearly fainted once, and that was not something he was going to do. Caldwell's restaurant had a back office off the kitchen, a narrow room that served as administrative storage, holding scheduling binders, the restaurant safe, a filing cabinet with vendor contracts, and a small 2-cushion couch where staff occasionally rested between split shifts. It was quiet during lunch service when all hands were on the floor. It had a lock on the door. On a Monday morning, before his shift began, Marcus brought Chloe in through the service entrance on the side alley, the one used for deliveries and staff arrivals. He had brought a proper pillow from home, Chloe's pillow, the one she actually slept on, because she slept better on her own pillow and sleep was one of the few things that actually helped. He'd brought a folded blanket. A thermos of the chicken soup he had made the night before, a recipe their mother had taught him when he was 12, simple and warm and the thing Chloe always asked for when she didn't feel well. Her medications in a labeled Ziploc bag with the times written on each one in marker. Her phone charger. A bottle of water. Her pressed flower notebook, because having it near her was the thing she did when she needed something quiet to hold on to. He set all of it up on the couch with the same careful precision he applied to everything. He kissed her on top of the head. He told her to text him at any sign of anything, any dizziness, any chest tightness, any nausea, anything at all, and he would come immediately. She nodded. She told him he didn't have to do this. He said, "Yes I do," and closed the door gently behind him and walked out onto the floor and started his shift. He did this on Monday. He did it on Tuesday. On Wednesday and Thursday the same. By Friday morning, pulling into the alley with Chloe in the passenger seat of the borrowed car he had arranged for the week, he allowed himself, just briefly, just for a moment, the dangerous thought that maybe he could hold this together. Maybe the county list would move. Maybe one of the assistance programs would recalculate his eligibility. Maybe something would shift. He had learned by then not to linger on thoughts like that. But on Friday morning, for a moment, he let himself have it. On Friday afternoon at 2:17, a sous chef named Derek went to the back office to retrieve a scheduling binder for a large private dinner reservation coming in that evening. He opened the door. He found Chloe asleep on the couch with a blanket pulled up to her chin, a thermos on the floor beside her, a notebook with pressed flowers on the cushion next to her hand. He stood in the doorway for a moment with the binder he had come for held against his chest. He was not a person who made decisions slowly. He went and found Howard. Howard came to the back office. He stood in the doorway the same way Derek had. He looked at Chloe, who by now had woken and was sitting up, blinking, her face carrying the specific expression of someone who had been bracing for this moment since Monday and had hoped it would not come and understood that it had. Howard closed the door. He went to find Marcus on the floor. He approached Marcus at the service station and said, quietly, "Can I speak with you?" Marcus followed him into the narrow hallway between the kitchen and the dining room. The door to the kitchen swung shut behind them. The hallway smelled of dish soap and the day's soup special, which was a roasted tomato bisque that Marcus had recommended to 6 tables that afternoon. Howard looked at him and said, "There is someone in the back office." Marcus met his eyes and said, "Yes." And then, before Howard could say anything further, Marcus told him everything. He did not soften it. He did not apologize for it. He stated it clearly and completely: Chloe's diagnosis, the specialist costs, the waiting list, the incident with her blood pressure, the math that had run out of room, the options he had explored, and the fact that this was the one that remained. He spoke in the tone of someone who had rehearsed this in his head many times and had decided that the clearest possible version of the truth was the only thing worth saying. Howard listened. He did not interrupt. When Marcus finished, there was a silence of perhaps 8 seconds. And then Howard said, "I hear you, Marcus, and I'm sorry. But I can't allow this. And effective today, your employment here is terminated." Marcus nodded. He did not argue. He did not raise his voice or make a scene or say anything beyond, "I understand." He went to the staff locker room. He changed out of his uniform, the white shirt, the black apron, folded both carefully and set them on the bench in the same way he left everything, neatly. He packed his backpack. He went to the back office. He opened the door. Chloe was sitting on the edge of the couch, fully upright, hands in her lap, the same posture she had held in Dr. Mehta's consultation room when he had explained her diagnosis. She had heard the muffled shape of the conversation through the wall. She knew. Her face was very still in the way that Marcus had come to understand was not absence of feeling but the opposite of it, feeling so large it could not be expressed on the surface without risk of collapse. He looked at her from the doorway. He said, simply, "Ready?" She stood up, slowly, the way she always stood now, giving her body a moment to calibrate. She picked up her pressed flower notebook from the cushion and put it in her bag. He held the door open. She walked through it. He closed it behind them both. They came out through the service entrance into the alley, then around the front of the building to the main street. And as they passed the large plate glass front window of Caldwell's dining room, the woman at table 7 looked up. Now let us stop here for a moment, because what happened in the next 11 seconds at table 7 is the pivot point of this entire story. And we want you to understand who this woman was and what she carried with her before we tell you what she did, because the action only makes full sense if you understand the person taking it. Her name was Catherine Ellison. She was 54 years old. She had grown up in Memphis, the daughter of a woman who worked in hospital administration and a father who taught high school biology, both of them people who operated with quiet competence in systems that they had not designed and could not fully control, which was perhaps where Catherine had learned the particular skill of navigating institutions from the inside. She had studied business administration at the University of Tennessee, the first in her family to attend a 4-year university, and after graduating she had spent 5 years working in the procurement division of a regional hospital system, learning from the inside exactly how medical supply chains worked and, more importantly, exactly where they broke down. In 1997, at 31 years old, she and a business partner named James Okafor had started Ellison Okafor Healthcare Partners in a rented 2-room office in Nashville with a second-hand server, 2 laptops, and a government contract with a state health agency that Catherine had spent 2 years pursuing before they awarded it to her. James had handled the technology architecture. Catherine had handled everything else. They had built the company slowly and correctly, which is a different trajectory than fast and visible, and the difference between those two things was why the company still existed 23 years later while several of its early competitors did not. Ellison Healthcare Partners now coordinated medical supply logistics for hospital systems across 12 states, ensuring that the right equipment and materials moved through the right channels to reach patients at the right time, work that was invisible when it was done well and catastrophic when it wasn't. The company's revenue placed it consistently on regional business lists that Catherine found mildly embarrassing because she had never started a company to be on a list. She had started it because she had seen, during those 5 years in hospital procurement, exactly how preventable failures in logistics cost patients their care and sometimes their lives, and she had believed she could build something that fixed that. She had built it. It had worked. She was not particularly comfortable with the attention that came with the success, which was part of why she ate alone when she traveled and did not announce her presence in rooms the way people with her level of resources sometimes learn to do. She was in Knoxville on a Wednesday in October for a board meeting at Southeastern Regional Medical Center, which had recently contracted with Ellison Healthcare Partners for a logistics coordination overhaul that Catherine was personally overseeing in its early stages. She had arrived at Caldwell's at 11:45, 40 minutes before the meeting. As she usually did, she found that 40 minutes of solitude before a significant meeting clarified her thinking in ways that nothing else quite replicated. She had ordered sparkling water and a roasted vegetable plate and had been eating slowly and looking out the front window at the street, the way she did when her mind was running quietly in the background on something she hadn't yet fully articulated to herself. She had noticed Marcus during the first hour. Not conspicuously, not in the way of someone watching, but in the peripheral, ambient way of a person who has spent 23 years paying close attention to how people perform under pressure. He was good. Not just technically proficient but genuinely attentive, and there is a meaningful difference between those two things that most diners never consciously identify but always unconsciously feel. She had also noticed, at the edge of her awareness, that he moved toward the back of the restaurant at intervals that didn't align naturally with the rhythms of service. She hadn't followed the thought. She had her meeting to prepare for. And then the hallway conversation happened, and the back and forth of it reached her as a low murmur that she couldn't hear clearly but could read in posture and cadence, and then Marcus had gone into the back and come out in street clothes with a backpack, and the young woman came out of the back of the restaurant and took his arm, moving carefully, and they walked past the window. Catherine watched them until they cleared the frame. And then she sat with what she had just seen for exactly 11 seconds. She had spent 23 years at the intersection of medical care and the systems that either deliver it or fail to. She knew that annual direct costs for lupus nephritis and similar serious chronic conditions could exceed $50,000, and that the burden fell hardest on families stretched thin, people pushed into choices between their income and the care of someone they loved. Goodreads. She knew what a caregiver looked like when they had been carrying something past the point of what a person should be asked to carry alone. She knew what it looked like when the official channels had been exhausted and someone had improvised a solution out of love and desperation because those were the only available materials. She did not know Marcus's name or Chloe's diagnosis or the detail of the back office and the soup and the pressed flower notebook. But she knew the shape of what she had just witnessed. And she knew one other thing, something that settled in her chest in the particular way of a decision that has already been made and is now simply waiting to be acted on. She had the ability to do something about this. Not eventually. Right now. Before they reached the bus stop. She left $400 on the table for a $62 bill. She was already reaching for her phone as she stood up. She did not go to the door immediately. She stepped to the side of the entrance, away from the other diners, and she made a call. She called Dr. Raymond Torres, the executive director of the Tennessee Healthcare Navigation Alliance, a nonprofit that Ellison Healthcare Partners had funded at a significant level for 3 consecutive years and whose board Catherine sat on in an advisory capacity. Dr. Torres picked up on the second ring, as he generally did when Catherine Ellison called, because when Catherine Ellison called it was generally worth picking up. She described what she had seen in 90 seconds or less. The specificity with which she could convey the essential facts of a situation was something her staff had remarked on for years. Young male server, mid-20s, terminated from employment while in the middle of what appeared to be an improvised caregiving situation for a visibly ill younger sibling. Shape of a chronic illness management crisis. All markers of someone who had exhausted standard channels and was operating without a net. She asked Dr. Torres 2 questions. Did the Alliance have their emergency placement fund currently active, and could a case be flagged for priority review today based on her personal referral? Dr. Torres said yes to both. She said she would have contact information to him within the hour. She thanked him. She hung up. She pushed open the front door of Caldwell's and walked down the block toward the bus stop. If you are still watching at this point, drop a comment right now with the words, "I'm still here." Let us see who is truly following this story all the way through. Because what happens next is the part that changes everything, and we do not want you to miss a single word of it. Marcus heard footsteps behind them and turned. His face arranged itself in the careful, neutral expression of someone who has had enough of this day and is managing the remainder of it on fumes and willpower and does not have room for whatever a stranger's presence on the sidewalk is about to require of him. The woman who had approached them was well dressed in a plain way, dark jacket, no jewelry that he noticed, carrying a phone rather than a bag. She was perhaps his mother's age. She had the kind of direct gaze that made him feel, uncomfortably, that she was not looking at the surface of him. She introduced herself by first name only, Catherine, and said she had been sitting at table 7. Marcus said, with the politeness of someone being very careful not to be impolite, "Can I help you with something?" And she said, "I think it may be the other way around." Chloe, beside Marcus, had been watching the woman approach with an expression that was difficult to read, somewhere between exhaustion and the particular wariness of someone who has learned through repeated experience that people who approach you with an offer in hand almost always want something in return that you eventually won't be able to pay. She said nothing. She waited. Catherine told them what she had already done. Not as an offer, not as a proposal, not wrapped in sentiment or hedged with qualifications. She told them factually and completely, the way she presented information to a board. A phone call had been made, an emergency placement review was being opened, this is what the organization does, this is what the review process involves, this is the contact information you will receive within the hour if you agree to proceed. She explained that the Tennessee Healthcare Navigation Alliance had an emergency fund specifically designed for cases meeting certain criteria, a primary family caregiver who was also the household's principal income source, managing a serious chronic illness situation, with documented evidence of exhausted standard care channels. She said she believed Chloe's situation would meet those criteria. She said no money changed hands and no obligations were created. She said, "You do not owe me anything, and this is not conditional on anything except whether you want to proceed." Marcus looked at Chloe. Chloe was looking at Catherine with an expression he had not seen on his sister's face in a long time, not hope exactly, because hope is a thing you have to have energy for, and Chloe had been running on something below energy for months. It was more like the expression of someone whose body has been fighting something for so long that the possibility of not fighting quite so hard, of having even a small portion of the weight shifted, is almost too much to process while standing upright on a sidewalk. She looked at Marcus. He looked back at her. And then she looked at Catherine and said, quietly, "Why?" Catherine said, "Because I have the ability to do something about what I just watched happen, and that means I don't really have the option of not doing it." Chloe looked at her for a moment longer. And then she said, quietly, "Okay." Marcus gave Catherine his number. She sent him Dr. Torres's direct contact information at 4:58 that afternoon, 58 minutes after she said she would, which was 2 minutes ahead of the hour she had promised. The message was 3 sentences. The contact information. The name of the case coordinator who would be reaching out. And one additional line, the Pharmaceutical Assistance Program linked to the Alliance covers up to 70% of out-of-pocket medication costs for qualifying enrollees. Reach out to Dr. Torres today if possible. The sooner the review begins, the faster the timeline moves. Marcus read the message sitting on the bus home, Chloe asleep against his shoulder, the city moving past the window outside. He read it twice. He put the phone in his pocket and looked at the ceiling of the bus for a long moment and thought about calling his mother, who was sleeping before her overnight shift and whom he had not told the full story because he had not wanted to add to what she was already carrying. He decided he would tell her tonight, when she got up for work. He would tell her all of it. It was time. He called Dr. Torres at 5:15. Dr. Torres was professional, warm, specific, and organized in the way of someone who had been navigating complex care situations for a long time and had gotten very good at making the complexity feel less overwhelming to the people inside it. He asked Marcus a series of precise questions: Chloe's diagnosis, her current treatment protocol, her specialist's name and practice, their current insurance situation, their household income as of the most recent tax year, the county waiting list reference number. Marcus had all of it. He had it in the Notes app, organized the same way his mother had organized the spreadsheet on the refrigerator, green for confirmed, red for pending, everything dated. Dr. Torres said he would have a preliminary eligibility assessment back to Marcus within 48 hours and that given Catherine's personal referral and the specifics of the situation, he was optimistic. Marcus thanked him. He sat in the kitchen after the call and looked at the ceiling of their apartment for a while. Then he got up and started making dinner. The preliminary assessment came back in 36 hours, not 48. Chloe qualified for emergency placement status. The criteria she met included primary caregiver dependency, documented chronic illness requiring consistent professional management, and demonstrated evidence that standard care channels had been pursued and proven inaccessible within the necessary time frame. Dr. Torres used the word documented carefully, and Marcus realized as he listened that the notes in his phone, the waiting list reference number, the agency call records, the income threshold denial from the assistance program, constituted exactly the kind of documentation that a case like this required and that most people in his position did not know to keep. He had kept it because he kept everything, because that was how his mother had run the household and he had learned it from her without being taught it explicitly, and in this moment that habit was the difference between a 2-week processing time and an emergency review. Within 5 days of the phone call to Dr. Torres, a certified in-home care coordinator named Patricia Okonkwo had been assigned to Chloe's case and had come to the apartment for an initial assessment. She was a woman of 60 or so with the particular combination of warmth and precision that the best medical professionals develop over long careers, warm enough to make Chloe feel like a person rather than a case file, precise enough to make Marcus feel like the situation was being managed by someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She sat at their kitchen table for 2 hours. She asked Chloe questions about her daily symptoms, her fatigue patterns, her current medication schedule, what the best hours of the day were and what the hardest ones were. She asked Marcus about his work schedule, his commute, his availability for emergencies. She made notes in a tablet and reviewed them at the end with both of them, going through the care plan she was recommending as though the two of them were part of the team designing it, not just the recipients of it, which was a quality of respect that Marcus had not fully expected and that moved him in a way he did not express in the room but felt for a long time afterward. A certified aide began coming to the apartment 3 mornings a week the following Monday. Her name was Delia. She was 28, an LPN candidate completing her practical hours, and she and Chloe discovered within the first hour that they had both been obsessed with the same obscure PBS nature documentary series about migratory birds, which led to a conversation that was still going when Marcus left for his shift at 10 that morning. He walked to the bus stop with something in his chest that he had not felt in a long time, not happiness exactly, not yet, but the structural precondition of it. The sense that the ground was slightly more solid than it had been. That something which had been entirely on him was now, for the first time in months, not entirely on him. He sat on the bus and looked out the window and let himself feel it without immediately calculating what came next. The Pharmaceutical Assistance Program connected to the Tennessee Healthcare Navigation Alliance covered 72% of Chloe's monthly medication out-of-pocket costs. This reduced her monthly expense from $387 to $108, a difference that, in the math Marcus had been running for months, was the exact amount that had been pushing them past the edge every single month. $108 was something he could manage. $387 had been something he could not. That distance, that specific financial gap, had been the thing driving every desperate decision of the preceding months, including the back office, including the folded uniform on the locker room bench, including everything. And it had been closed, not by a stroke of luck or a dramatic windfall but by the existence of a program that Chloe had technically qualified for all along and that nobody in any of the standard channels Marcus had navigated had mentioned or pointed him toward. That is a fact worth sitting with. Financial assistance programs for chronic illness patients exist across multiple sectors IMDb, and organizations provide help with arbitration and negotiations related to medical debt or job retention issues, with financial resource directories specifically for uninsured and underinsured patients. TikTok. These programs existed before Catherine Ellison made her phone call. The resources were there. What was missing was the bridge. Someone who knew where the doors were and had the relationships to open them quickly. That is what Catherine provided. Not money. Not charity. A phone call and a referral and the name of the right person to call. Think about that distinction and what it means about how the system is structured and who it was structured for. On the 8th day after the termination, Howard called Marcus. Marcus was at the kitchen table, reviewing the updated care schedule with the Notes app, when the call came from a number he recognized immediately. He answered. Howard said, Marcus. Marcus said, Howard. There was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds. Howard said he had been thinking since Wednesday. He said he had sat down with Patricia Caldwell, the restaurant's owner, a woman who had founded the place 19 years ago and who was by temperament and experience less interested in liability calculations than in the question of what was actually right, and he had told her the full story. He said she had listened and then asked him a question that he had found difficult to answer. If Marcus had come to him with this situation before resorting to the back office, what would Howard have done? Howard said, and Marcus could hear in his voice that this was a question he had been sitting with for 8 days, that he honestly didn't know what he would have done. He said that uncertainty had been bothering him. He said that Patricia had said, then maybe we should give him the chance to find out. He said that if Marcus was willing, they wanted to offer his position back, with a modified scheduling arrangement that would allow a flexible late morning start 3 days per week to align with the aide's arrival schedule. He said it wasn't a perfect solution but it was a real one offered without conditions. Marcus was quiet for a moment. Then he said, yes. I'm willing. On his first morning back, Marcus came in through the front door of Caldwell's for the first time. He had always come through the service entrance, habit, efficiency, the practical rhythm of the job. But on this morning he came through the front, the same door that customers used, and he stood for a moment in the entrance the way you stand somewhere when you understand that the place looks different to you now than it did before. Howard met him just inside. He extended his hand. Marcus shook it. They didn't say much. They didn't need to say much. Howard said, "Welcome back." Marcus said, "Thank you." And then he went to the locker room and put on his uniform and went out to the floor and started his shift, and the restaurant continued around him the way restaurants do, without ceremony or announcement, the way life continues after the hardest moments are over. Now here is the part of the story about Catherine Ellison that she did not advertise and that we think matters as much as anything else in this account. She flew back to Nashville the evening of that Wednesday, the same day she had left $400 on a $62 table and stood on a sidewalk in Knoxville and made a phone call before she even introduced herself. She went back to her board meeting at Southeastern Regional that afternoon, the meeting she had come to Knoxville for, the one she had been sitting at Caldwell's preparing for. She ran it with the same precision she brought to everything. She flew home. She went back to the 100 moving parts of a company she had spent 23 years building. She did not post about what had happened. She did not tell the story at a board dinner or include it in a speaking engagement or share it with a journalist. She told exactly two people, James Okafor, her original business partner, who had been her closest professional confidant for over 2 decades, and her older sister in Memphis, who was the person she called when something happened that she needed to process out loud. Both of them listened. James said, characteristically, "Of course you did." Her sister said, "Tell me the girl's name again." "Chloe," Catherine said. Her sister was quiet for a moment and then said, "I hope she knows someone is rooting for her." Catherine said, "I hope so too." What Catherine thought about in the weeks that followed was not the grand gesture of it, because she did not experience it as a grand gesture, she experienced it as a phone call she made while walking from a restaurant to a bus stop. What she thought about was the quality of something she had witnessed from Table 7 that she kept coming back to. She had watched Marcus walk out of that building, fired, uncertain about what came next, carrying a sick sister on one arm and a situation that had no clear resolution, and his face, in profile as he passed the window, had been steady. Not happy. Not resolute in any dramatic sense. Just steady. The face of someone who understood that whatever came next, they were going to continue walking toward it. She had hired and managed and occasionally let go hundreds of people over 23 years. She had seen how people looked when they lost a job, when they were afraid, when they were holding something heavy. She had not often seen that particular steadiness. She thought about it at her desk in Nashville on quiet mornings. She thought it was one of the most specifically dignified things she had ever seen from close range, and she had seen a lot of things from close range. She also thought, with increasing frequency, about something that the experience had surfaced in her understanding of the work she had spent her career doing. She sat on 3 nonprofit boards. She wrote significant checks to healthcare navigation organizations annually. She had approved funding for emergency placement programs, pharmaceutical assistance initiatives, care coordination services. She had reviewed the impact reports, the aggregate numbers, the cases served, the costs offset. She had understood the work abstractly, at the level of systems and programs and outcomes data. She had not, before that Wednesday in October, watched from 11 feet away as the thing she funded reached a specific person at the exact moment they needed it. The distance between those two experiences, between knowing the work matters in the aggregate and watching it matter to one person in real time, was something she had not fully understood until that sidewalk. She started asking different questions in board meetings after that. Not about the numbers, which she had always understood, but about the gaps, the people who qualified and didn't know, the programs that existed and went unfound, the bridges that weren't being built between people in crisis and the resources designed for them. She started pushing for outreach and navigation infrastructure in ways she had not previously prioritized. It was a shift in emphasis, not a reversal, but it was real and it was lasting, and it came directly from a Wednesday afternoon on a sidewalk in Knoxville, Tennessee. She followed up with Dr. Torres once, 3 weeks after the initial call, a brief check-in to confirm the placement had gone through and the care plan was in motion. He confirmed it. She thanked him. She did not request details beyond that. She did not reach out to Marcus or Chloe directly. She had done what she had done, and she trusted Dr. Torres and Patricia Okonkwo and Delia and the system she had helped fund to carry it forward from there. She believed, and had always believed, that help done correctly does not require the person who provides it to remain in the frame. 6 weeks after the emergency placement began, Chloe's next scheduled nephrology appointment with Dr. Mehta returned lab results that were meaningfully better than the previous visit. Her kidney function had not deteriorated in the way he had been monitoring for. Her protein levels were within a range that, while not normal, were being held by the consistent medication adherence that was now possible because the monthly cost of those medications was no longer a decision point. Dr. Mehta used the phrase holding steady at the appointment, which in the clinical vocabulary of lupus nephritis is not a small thing. Holding steady is the goal. Holding steady is what allows the next set of possibilities to remain open. Chloe wrote holding steady in the margin of her pressed flower notebook at the top of a page and pressed a small yellow clover beside it that she had found growing through a crack in the sidewalk outside the medical building, which she told Marcus later she thought was appropriate given the circumstances. 2 months after that appointment, Chloe re-enrolled in one nursing class at the community college. Just one, a pace she and Patricia Okonkwo had discussed carefully, mapped against her energy patterns and her treatment schedule, designed to be sustainable rather than ambitious in a way that her body couldn't sustain. The class was an anatomy and physiology refresher. She had taken it before her diagnosis and had excelled at it. She took it again, more slowly, but she took it. She emailed her original professor, a woman named Dr. Langford who had written her a strong recommendation before the diagnosis, to let her know she was back. Dr. Langford wrote back the same day. The email was 4 sentences long and ended with, "I'm glad. Keep going." That was all. Chloe read it 3 times and then added a pressed sprig of rosemary to the notebook on the page where she kept the email printed out, because rosemary, she told Marcus, means remembrance. He said, "I know." He had looked it up after she told him the first time, 2 years ago, that she pressed things with meanings attached to them. He had been keeping track. Marcus was promoted to shift lead at Caldwell's 4 months after returning. Howard announced it at the pre-service meeting on a Tuesday, and the staff applauded briefly, the way restaurant staff applaud, quickly, sincerely, already thinking about the reservation list for the evening. Marcus thanked them and went out to the floor and did his job. He used the modest increase in his hourly rate to start a small savings account, not large, not dramatic, just a category in the Notes app that hadn't existed before and now existed. He called it the buffer. The buffer was the thing that meant the math didn't have to be perfect every single month. The existence of the buffer was the thing that made him feel, for the first time in a long time, like he was not standing at the very edge of what was manageable. He did not tell many people about the buffer. He told Chloe, who said, "Good," and went back to her notebook. He told his mother, who was quiet on the phone for a moment and then said, "Your father would have said something embarrassing right now and I'm going to spare you that." He laughed, which surprised him. He hadn't laughed at something unexpected for a while. It felt like something coming back online. "Here is what we want to ask you, and we want you to actually think about this, not just scroll past it. Think about the phone call Catherine Ellison made before she ever introduced herself to Marcus on that sidewalk. Think about the fact that she did not wait to meet him first, did not wait to hear the full story, did not wait to confirm her read of the situation before she acted. She had 11 seconds of observation from Table 7 and 23 years of expertise in healthcare navigation, and she put them together and she moved. She was already on the phone before she was outside. Now think about your own life, your own expertise, your own field of knowledge and relationships and access. Because Catherine Ellison's action was extraordinary not because she was a billionaire but because she was paying attention and she moved quickly when she recognized something she could address. Most of us have a version of that capacity in some domain. Most of us have a phone call we could make, a connection we could offer, a door we know how to open that someone else doesn't. The question is not whether you have the resources of Catherine Ellison. The question is whether you have 11 seconds of attention and the willingness to act on what you see. How many of those moments have you had and not recognized until later? How many are you going to have today, this week, in the next year of your life? And what is the one thing that makes the difference between the version of yourself that makes the call and the version that sits back down and finishes their lunch? We do not ask that to make you feel guilty. We ask it because it is a question worth living inside of for a while, the way Marcus and Chloe and Catherine have all, in their different ways, been living inside it since that October afternoon. Marcus lives inside it by keeping a small notebook of his own now, not flowers, but names. The names of people he works with who seem like they are carrying something they have not told anyone. He checks in on them. Not intrusively, not dramatically. Just a question. Just an acknowledgement. Just making sure they know he can see that something is there. He told someone once that he started doing it because the most unbearable part of the hardest months had not been the hardship itself. It had been the feeling that nobody around him could see it. He decided he wanted to be someone who could see it. That is not a small thing to decide. That is, in fact, one of the most important decisions a person can make about who they are going to be in the world. Chloe lives inside the question differently. She is studying nursing slowly, at the pace her body permits, and she has started volunteering 2 hours on Saturday mornings at the Tennessee Healthcare Navigation Alliance's patient intake line, answering calls from families navigating the same kind of crisis she navigated, explaining the same programs that changed her situation, telling people clearly and specifically what they qualify for and what the next step is. She is good at it in the way that people are good at something when they have lived it. She does not tell callers her own story unless they ask. When they do ask, she tells it completely, including the back office and the soup and the pressed flower notebook on the couch. She tells it because she has found that the most useful thing she can offer to someone who is in the middle of the impossible math, who is running the numbers and coming up wrong every time, is evidence that the impossible math can be interrupted. That it can be interrupted from the outside, by someone paying attention. And that they are worth having someone pay attention. She says those words directly, on the phone, to strangers. You are worth having someone pay attention. She says it because nobody said it to her while she was in the back office of a restaurant, hiding between inventory boxes and scheduling binders, trying not to be a burden on the one person who had already given up his guitar and his sleep and his job security to keep her here. She says it because it is true and because it costs nothing to say it and because the effect of hearing it, she has found, is not nothing. The pressed flower notebook, the original one, soft-covered, the one Chloe had since middle school and that Marcus had brought to the back office with her pillow and her soup and her medications, is full now. She filled the last page the week she completed her anatomy refresher course. On that last page she pressed a single small wildflower, pale yellow, the kind that grows in sidewalk cracks, and she wrote below it in her careful handwriting, "Still here." 2 words. The same words Marcus had said at the very beginning of all of this, in the apartment that night after the blood pressure incident, when he had told her, "We'll figure it out." Still here is the answer to that statement. It is the proof that he was right. It is the whole story in 2 words. Marcus read it when she showed him the page. He looked at it for a long time. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. There is one more thing we want to tell you about Catherine Ellison before we close this story, because it is the piece that tends to stay with people longest. 3 months after the Knoxville afternoon, Catherine was preparing for the annual review meeting of the Tennessee Healthcare Navigation Alliance's board, going through the year's impact report, reviewing the cases served, the costs offset, the placements made. And there, in the aggregate data, in a table she would not normally have looked at with any particularity, she saw a case reference number that corresponded to an emergency placement review initiated in October. She did not know Marcus's name. The case was anonymized in the report. But she saw the profile: young male adult caregiver, sibling with chronic renal condition, emergency placement with aid and pharmaceutical support, timeline from referral to placement, 5 days. She looked at that number, 5 days, for a long moment. The standard timeline for non-emergency cases in the same county, listed in the adjacent column, was 4 to 6 months. She had known that number in the abstract before. She had approved funding based on it, had spoken about it in board meetings, had understood it as a systemic problem to be addressed. She had not, before that review meeting, looked at it and thought, 5 days versus 6 months is the distance between someone's life staying intact and someone's life coming apart. She had not looked at it and thought, I have been on the right side of that gap, in this work, for 23 years. She looked at it now and she thought both of those things. And then she closed the report and went into the board meeting and proposed a significant increase in the Alliance's emergency fund capacity for the following fiscal year. The board approved it unanimously. 3 additional staff positions in the navigation intake team were created as a result. The standard processing time for non-emergency cases in Knox County dropped from 4 to 6 months to 11 weeks over the course of the following year. That is not nothing. That is, to be specific, the difference between 6 months and 11 weeks for a family sitting at a kitchen table running numbers that don't add up. That is the ripple. That is what one phone call made from a sidewalk in October continued to mean, in ways that were invisible and unmeasured and permanent. And here is what we believe, and what we want to leave you with today. Not as a lesson, you are capable of finding your own. But as an observation. The hardest part of Marcus and Chloe's story was not the diagnosis. It was not the money. It was not even the morning in the alley with the pillow and the soup and the folded blanket. The hardest part was the invisibility of it. The way the whole weight of a life's crisis can be happening inside one person while the world moves around them without knowing. The way you can be running out of room and nobody sitting 3 feet away from you at a lunch counter has any idea. The way the systems that exist to help are complicated enough that exhausted people can fail to reach them even when they technically qualify. Marcus did everything right. He showed up. He worked hard. He loved his sister well enough to do something risky and imperfect to keep her here. And he was still 3 weeks from the edge of not being able to hold it together. That is not a story about individual failure. That is a story about what it costs, in America right now, to love someone who is sick. And it deserves to be told clearly, and heard seriously, and held carefully. What Catherine did was not separate from that reality. It was a response to it. She was one person who saw one situation and moved in the space of 11 seconds to connect one family with resources that already existed and were designed exactly for them. She did not fix the system. She did not end the crisis of medical debt or the inadequacy of caregiver support or the gap between what insurance covers and what serious illness costs. She made one phone call on one sidewalk on one afternoon. And it was enough. And it matters enormously, that it was enough. Because if one phone call from one person who knows the right number can be enough to hold a life together, then the question we each have to sit with is not whether we can be Catherine Ellison. The question is whether we are paying attention. Whether we are watching. Whether we are, when we see something we recognize from everything we know and everything we have lived, whether we are willing to stand up from table 7 and make the call. So today, right now, we want to ask you something directly. Is there someone in your life who is in the back office, not literally, but in the way that Marcus and Chloe were in the back office, keeping something hidden because they have run out of official options and they are making do with what they have left? Is there someone you know who is running the impossible math and coming up wrong every time and has not told you the full picture because they do not want to burden you? Think about that person. Think about whether you have a number to call. Think about whether you have 11 seconds and the willingness to stand up. And if you do, we think you might already know what to do next. If this story stayed with you today, we want to hear from you in the comments. Tell us which moment hit you the hardest. Was it Marcus folding his uniform on the bench? Was it Chloe sitting on the edge of the couch with her hands in her lap? Was it Catherine already on the phone before she reached the sidewalk? Was it the 2 words at the end of the notebook, still here? Tell us. And share this story today with someone who needs to hear it. Not for the numbers. For the person in your life who might be sitting in a back office somewhere, quietly, holding everything together, waiting for someone to see them. That is why we tell stories like this one. That is exactly why. And we will see you in the next one.